All right. Can everyone hear me? All right. I want to give a shout out to our food team that came early to make sure everyone got fed. Hopefully, if you haven't gotten a plate, you get another one, or if you haven't got one, get one. But if you already have, go ahead and get another one so we don't have any leftovers to take home. But it's really great to see everyone here in person, and I know a few of our folks have joined us via live stream on Zoom across the country. There are a few people that I do want to recognize before we get started. I know in the Zoom there should be John Waller, who is our past caravan coordinator, who has done an amazing job and finished it out with our 30th anniversary caravan. That being said, I would like to introduce our new caravan coordinator, Marian Morales. I'm sure she's been in contact with a lot of you here in person and on Zoom about our upcoming caravan. That's why all of us are here. There's also Isaac Gusso, who is on the Zoom, who is our delegation coordinator. And then also there are a couple of IFCO board members. Dawood should be here very soon. And then Dr. Rosemary Mealy, Historic Black Panther, she is also in the Zoom. She is not back to New York yet. So hopefully she'll be able to join us for our next event. I would also like to give one more mention to my friend, Yvonne Casal, the second secretary from the Cuban mission, who has joined us tonight. Thank you, Yvonne, for making the time to come and support us. So I'm here to talk about the Friendshipment Caravan. And I think what's particular about the caravan is it calls us to action. It's not merely a cultural exchange, but an experience that pulls you into solidarity and expects you to come back to do the work to demand an end to the blockade. We, as an interfaith organization, believe that faith should be put into action. That, in fact, in the words of our founder, Reverend Lucius Walker, There's no contradiction between the social message of the gospel that Jesus described in Matthew chapter 25 and the revolution as we see it unfolding in Cuba. Is it possible that the Cuban Revolution is more faithful to humanity than the church? Churches have often remained silent in the face of oppression, imperialism, and destruction of hope and dreams of the children of the world. It is not possible to practice faith, the faith that the Bible teaches us, without being revolutionary. For more than 3 decades, we have followed this legacy. From our faith, under the leadership of our courageous and humble pastor, the Reverend Lucius Walker, and now under the leadership of his daughter, Gail Walker. They have mobilized Cubans and Americans from diverse creeds and lifestyles, and who have embodied the fight against the criminal and genocidal U.S. blockade. In this beautiful, well-known project of Pastors for Peace, we have seen with our own eyes how powerful the force of love is against intolerance and cruelty. For the participants from the United States, the caravan embodies 2 moral imperatives. On the one hand, to witness and learn from our Cuban neighbors who needlessly suffer due to the criminal and genocidal sanctions imposed by the U.S. government. And on the other hand, to stand united in direct opposition of the travel ban and all policies which impose barriers on relationship building and exchange between our peoples by the United States. Reverend Lucius Walker used to say, "What Cuba needs most is solidarity and prophetic action to end the blockade." He said that this has to do with our right to give and express our love that should not be determined by the government of the United States, but rather by our faith. And we intend to live out this call to ensure that our Cuban neighbors are given the right to self-determination, to defend the Cuban model, which shows us in the U.S. an alternative future. We now will hear from Director Gail Walker, who's down on the ground in Cuba, making plans for the upcoming caravan. So apologies that she couldn't be with us, but now you will see her digitally.
Familia, estamos aquí en Cuba con nuestra familia, with our family from ICAP, Yamil, and all the others that are going to be joining us as we plan to organize a wonderful caravan this summer. We're sorry that we can't be there with you, but know that we've been meeting and making plans for this summer. We're excited. We're going to Oriente this year. We need you to join us. Yamil,
we need you here. Please come, join the caravan.
Be with us soon, this July. We expect to see you soon. Ciao.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today, this evening, taking all your time to spend with us. We appreciate you for being here. Next, we're going to have our past caravanistas speak about how this caravan works to connect the struggles of the working class in the U.S. to the solution models Cuba has in place to provide universal health care and housing and access to higher education. Cuba shows us what is possible with the proper prevention, determination, and organization. The people we will hear from next will share what they learned and the impact that traveling to Cuba had on their work once they returned. First, we have Tanya Lozano, who came with us on our last 2 caravans. She's from Chicago. Tanya Lozano is an activist, healthcare advocate, and community architect battling the many challenges affecting Black and Brown communities. As founder of Healthy Hood Chicago, Tanya leads a robust portfolio of programs aiming to engage, educate, and empower youth and families in personal and community health, wellness, and social initiatives. Through her partnerships with Rush Medical Group, the City of Chicago, major brands, and other local non-for-profit organizations, Tanya inspires sustainable sustainable, healthy lifestyles through a co-sponsored programming, event production, creative engagement strategy, and community outreach. Tanya was most recently recognized as Chicagoan of the Year of 2020 and recipient of the Red Cross Hero Award in the category of social justice. Welcome, Tanya.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you all. Behind me, I have Brianna, Karen, and K-Rod, Christina, two of which came with us on our last delegation. This will be our third time as an organization joining the Pastors for Peace Caravan, and we're just very, very excited about it. Just again, to tell you a little bit more information about who we are. We're Healthy Hood Chicago. We are an organization modeled after the Black Panther Party with an emphasis on health and wellness. We take a social justice approach to health and wellness because in Chicago, there is a 20-year life expectancy gap between communities of color and affluent white communities. It's actually the largest life expectancy gap that exists in all of the country because Chicago is so segregated. So when people say disparities are not racial, Chicago debunks that myth. And so our health and wellness programs are actually modeled directly from the Cuban healthcare model, which is that there is a basic health team that lives on every block, that lives with the people as the people, understands the circumstances and the conditions of the people, therefore can give adequate health care to those people. And so we have been in the process of developing that model here in Chicago in our Black and Brown communities and have seen such a success with the pilot program and have been able to see really incredible impact very quickly. As far as what I can say is what the Caravan has done for us as an organization, number one, from going just from studying their healthcare system to witnessing it firsthand is very different. And it really invokes the type of inspiration and motivation that we need to be a consistent people of resistance. And secondly, I would say when it comes to bringing these young people with us, it really gives them a bigger picture. It really allows them to see themselves and ourselves in our movement for social justice and the greater picture of what it is to be able to fight for self-determination as marginalized people all over the world. And so the political education that you get from this caravan supersedes, in my opinion, any other kind of political education you could receive, especially in the belly of the beast. And so coming back from this trip, you know, our cadre members are that much more committed. They understand why it is that we are choosing to model ourselves after the Cuban healthcare system, because they know that it's a successful model and that it puts people first, it centers people. And it's made us just an overall better organization. Like Angie said in her introduction, it makes solidarity an action word, right? Like we come back and we understand what our responsibility is, not just in using the Cuban healthcare model and the Cuban people and the revolution as inspiration for our own work, but now we have a responsibility and a duty to play our role and responsibility in lifting the blockade so that our Cuban comrades, the example is what we call them, can have self-determination without being blocked by this country and imperialism. And so I highly recommend anybody who hasn't been on this trip to go on this trip to get as many people to see for themselves Cuba, because it will completely blow your mind and radicalize you in a way that I don't think any place else can. And so from Healthy Hood Chicago, we say we cannot wait for this next caravan. We're going to double our delegation in numbers. We're going to we look forward to meeting anybody else who's coming on this trip, and all power to the people. Hasta la victoria siempre.
Thank you, Tanya, for speaking with us and taking all your time. I myself can say that Healthy Hood Chicago is an example of what many organizations should look like here in the United States. They're doing incredible work. We got to see it firsthand, and it's absolutely mind-blowing what they're doing over there. Next, we have Maya Teda. Maya is a research assistant here at the People's Forum and an organizer in Brooklyn, New York. She has been to Cuba through the International People's Assembly in 2022 of May, the May Day Brigade, and for the International November U.S.-Cuba Youth Exchange Summit. At the People's Forum, she works with the Cuba Solidarity Work. She also is the People's Forum, the People's Forum has a history of sending people for the Friendshipment Caravan, and we hope to see a lot of their participants come with us this year to Santiago.
Hi, everybody. Hi, thank you for the warm welcome. Welcome to our house, the People's Forum. Thank you so much for being here. Like they said, my name is Mia. I'm the research assistant here at the People's Forum. Angie wanted me to stand at this podium, so I'm gonna stand at this podium. Thank you so much to IFCO and Pastors for Peace for inviting me to speak about my experience going to Cuba. So at this point, I've been to Cuba twice. I went last year for the May Day celebration, and I went for the US-Cuba Youth Exchange Summit in November. And I'm just eternally grateful to see the process of the Cuban Revolution in person. And despite the decades of hybrid war that have been waged against that country by the United States, every single time I've gone, my delegation has been welcomed with openness, with the willingness to exchange, with the willingness to talk with us and understand the situation of the working class here in the United States. And so this development of the youth, the last time I went, we spent the full sort of 5 days with youth from Cuba, and they were with us for every event. They stayed with us in our lodging. And this value for the development of the youth showed up consistently wherever I went. So we were able to see the Center for Molecular Engineering, where we were presented to from young scientists who were developing their own research initiatives and explained to us how they developed the groundbreaking vaccines and treatments for ovarian cancer, lung cancer, diabetes. I mean, these were really, really young people. They were like about my age, and they were in charge of running the labs, designing their experiments, presenting on the experiments to us in English, which is very impressive. And then also at ELAM, which is the Latin American School of Medicine, we were able to go there, see medical students from across the global south in particular, join us in celebration of culture and performance. We got to see a Syrian student perform a song. We got to see 2 Colombian students perform an indigenous dance. And this was not just for tokenization or for fundraising, but this was really for creative expression of the heritage and the history that these students come from. It was also we were able to exchange culturally with other students. And I just like comparing that to any like medical school or institution here in the United States, that's not something you can see for free. That's definitely not something that is supported in every aspect of the institution. I mean, students were eager to tell me where they came from in Vietnam, and one girl told me that her grandmother actually attended medical school in Cuba, and that's why she was here. So it was just a really wonderful experience to see that and see how much the youth are appreciated and how much culture is valued as part of education. But I would think the most impactful part of my trip was witnessing the municipal elections in the municipality of La Corbata. So these elections are like the lowest level of the community. They're electing people to represent their neighborhood in the city assembly. And some things that you might not know about because of the mainstream media here in the United States, but these, there's no campaigning. The Cuban Constitution forbids any kind of campaigning. People at the municipal level don't receive any compensation for representing their neighborhood or being a delegate for their neighborhood. And just seeing this as a young person who I'm 25 years old, the last couple elections that I've witnessed or been a part of in the United States have not felt meaningful to me at all. It didn't feel like anything that I wanted to see changed in my society was being represented on the ballot from either party, either option. And so this was really a revitalizing and energizing moment for me to see that people were willing to represent their community by volunteering. They didn't want to be paid. There was no campaigning. They were just going with their reputation for what they did for their community, how they represented themselves. And the people were electing leaders from, like 3 blocks down. Our experience at this particular polling station was documented by Breakthrough News, so shout out to Breakthrough News. But they interviewed a woman who, and I think this is really powerful, but she asserted that Cuban democracy really does exist, and it starts at the level of the neighborhood. So she said, the community elects the president, basically saying that at the community level, this is where democracy starts in this country, and it starts from the bottom up, and it goes all the way to the top. And so these are all culminations of the process of the Cuban Revolution, which is important to study here in the United States, but we are all the more readily armed to defend and support the Cuban project when you've been there in person and you can experience the hospitality, the creativity, the solidarity between Cuba and the United States that has existed for a long time. And, you know, it's really important to understand that, you know, I'm a materialist, so I understand that realistically. When you go, you'll see the effects of the blockade. You will see how much sanctions impact every level of Cuban experience, Cuban life. There's no person who was not affected by the blockade that's been going on for 60 years. So it's important to understand that and not glorify Cuba, but to understand that the Cuban people are ready to take what they have and be creative, but it's our responsibility to come back and take what we've learned there and help get rid of the blockade, help to end the blockade, help to also get Cuba off the state sanctions of terrorism list, which has also tightened some of the restrictions. And also understand that Cuba see what the achievements of the Cuban Revolution have been, but also to see the ways that they've adapted over time, to see the ways that the processes of the revolution are further consolidating and bringing everybody under the banner of liberation. So I encourage you all to go with IFCO-Pastors for Peace and see Cuba for yourself. Thank you, Anne. And I hope to see you all there one day.
Thank you, Anne, for your solo. And thank you, Mia, for sharing your experience of that important youth exchange that I also got to go to and witness those same beautiful things that Cuba shows us again and again. Next, we have Dr. Aisha Fields. She's an applied optical physicist and international director of the All African Peoples Development Empowerment Project, ADEP, a nonprofit development organization founded by the Uhuru movement in 2007. As the ADEP director, Aisha is a member of the National Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party and is responsible for coordinating African community-led healthcare, agriculture, and educational programs on the continent of Africa and in African communities worldwide. Under her leadership, ADEP has built clean water systems, vocational and nursery schools, community farms, maternity centers, and a variety of youth and adult educational programs. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, ADEP developed an international COVID-19 telehealth program, which offers free online appointments with ADEP's licensed medical professionals through its emergency response program, Project Black Unk. Despite the grave colonial conditions of existence faced by African people around the world, Aisha believes that sustainable development for Africa and African communities is possible, but only through African self-reliance and self-determination. And she is the proud mother of 3 beautiful children.
Uhuru.
Welcome, Aisha.
Thank you so much. I really want to appreciate you, Comrade Angie, for that introduction. And I want to thank IFCO-Pastors for Peace for the invitation to participate in this 33rd Friendshipment Caravan launch party. I had the honor of participating in the 31st Friendshipment Caravan, which was less than 2 years ago, as a part of a 3-person contingent that represented our organization, the African People's Socialist Party, and specifically our development arm, the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project. And we in the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement have had a deep appreciation for IFCO's Cuba Solidarity work and its related work as a coordinator of the Latin American School of Medicine Scholarship Program for U.S. citizens for quite some time. And we were really excited to be able to join the caravan and learn about the realities of Cuban society and connect with and learn from Cuban medical personnel, from government officials and everyday Cuban citizens about the country's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. That trip had a very deep impact on our work in the Uhuru movement, specifically in APDEP, because our medical programs committee at that time had been leading the People's War Commission against COVID-19, which Angie talked about in the introduction, where, we were working to develop and distribute COVID-19 protocols in African working class communities in the US and Africa. And when we were building our international COVID-19 telehealth program, that has, since we established it in 2020, provided support to African and other people in Europe and Africa and in the United States. So that trip was really, really important for us, getting a glimpse at how Cuba handled the question of responding to COVID-19. Right now in ACTEP, our primary work is building what we call the Black Ankh, which is the African nation's own disaster preparedness and emergency response program. The Black Ankh is right now training African people everywhere we can to be able to prepare collectively for when there are hurricanes, tornadoes, mudslides, floods, and other emergencies. And, although we know that natural disasters aren't new, colonial climate change increases their frequency and intensity and makes it harder for people to cope with the impacts. And oftentimes African and other colonized people are in the process of rebuilding from one disaster when we're struck again by another. And throughout our motherland, Africa, colonial climate change is disrupting rainfall patterns. It's affecting our ability to grow food, to have access to sufficient amounts of water. The rising temperatures are causing a decrease in fish in lakes. And from what the scientists are telling us, the physical effects of climate change are going to intensify during the next 2 decades, especially in the 2030s. There's going to be more extreme storms. There are going to be droughts, floods, melting glaciers and ice caps, and rising sea levels, which are going to accompany the rising temperatures. And furthermore, scientists are saying that Africa is going to be the hardest hit continent by climate change, despite the fact that African people have played almost no role whatsoever in creating this colonial climate catastrophe. So we recognize, and the reason why this question of connecting with Cuba is so important is that African people around the world are disproportionately vulnerable to the effects of climate change and the intensifying weather emergencies, but we're often not in a position to respond to them. So APDEP is not just working to be able to understand what's happening, but to address this issue and not just waiting for the next disaster to occur, but to actually build Project Black community response teams in African communities around the world so that we can take this situation on head on. So for us, Cuba offers an unparalleled example of not only what a socialist future can look like for Africa and African people, but on a very practical level for APDEP, Cuba provides incredible models for people-centered healthcare and disaster preparedness that we have to learn from as we do our work. So if I may, before I close, there are just 2 quick things I want to share with everybody. First, I want to invite everybody who can make it to St. Louis in March 18th and 19th to our International Black Ankh Conference. The conference is going to lay out the basis for why we have to have Black Ankh. It's going to sum up what's happening to the planet because of colonial climate catastrophe. And it's going to have really important hands-on workshops on first aid, disaster preparedness, stop the bleed, and more. We're also going to have presentations by IFCO at this conference on the very successful Cuban model for disaster preparedness. So we're excited about that. Hopefully, okay, it looks like my screen was going crazy. Okay, registration is available online. If you can't make it to St. Louis, you can go to our website for more information. That's developmentforafrica.org. The second thing, real quick, is that I want to invite you to visit this website, handsoffuhuru.org. This is where you can learn about recent FBI attacks that were made on our organization, our chairman, Amalia Shatella, and other leaders of our movement on July 29th of last year. The violent 2-city pre-dawn raids and the bogus pretext for them have serious implications for all of us who are doing Cuba solidarity work, as it's a challenge to our ability to engage in our right to free speech and political association. So to learn more about this fight back, please go to handsoffuhuru.org. And on behalf of APDEP, the African People's Socialist Party, I want to really thank IFCO-Pastors for Peace for organizing this launch party, for your decades of honest, committed leadership in the fight to win solidarity for Cuba, and for your friendship and camaraderie and your support in helping APDEP to connect with our Cuban comrades on the ground to help us meet our goals. And I want to thank all of the Cuban hosts that hosted us and that are going to host this next caravan, from the MLK Center from ECAP and other organizations and government agencies for their hospitality, candor, transparency, and above all, for your work to continue to fight for self-determination for the Cuban people. I see my face is going crazy again. Hopefully you can hear me, but I just, again, want to say thank you to the 31st Caravannistas. I want to salute those who are traveling on the 33rd Caravan, say that I'm jealous that I'm not traveling with you, but get ready for the experience of a lifetime. Again, salute Director Gail Walker, her incredible staff, and thank you for helping many of us see the reality that Cuba is the light. Uhuru.
Thank you, Aisha Fields, for taking out your time to share all that knowledge with us and that experience. That's how true it is, everything that she's saying, that it was messing up technically. So next we have Chris Hollis, is a member of the Black Workers for Justice and National UE Union of Organizer and member of the UE 150. Chris has been a key leader in organizing for the poultry rendering industry organizing and union movement in NC. Chris has also been assigned to the Virginia Beach and Newport News Municipal Union movement as a project organizer in 2020 and 2021, fighting for workers' rights and petitioning of demands towards the city managers and city council in both VA locations and as far as Staten Island, New York, in support of all the ALU union campaign. As a trade labor organizer and revolutionary, Chris wholeheartedly believes that you have to become the change you are looking for, and that can only be achieved through collective action, i.e. an open hand slap will only get your attention, but a closed fist will put you to sleep. With that, keep your fist up.
I think we have some technical issues. Let me see. Okay. All right, better. Yes, hello, comrades. Yes, I see that some of my Caravannistas, Aisha, Sister Aisha, and Tanya, shout out to you. You know, some hellified comrades. But Cuba within itself is a life-changing experience. I'm lost for words. It's gonna change your life, the delegation. We've seen so many things, you know, been to so many places. And just to understand what the Cuban revolutionary struggle is all about, it just touches home, especially being Black in this country called the US of A. But while in Cuba, I had the opportunity to visit a trade labor union. It was an electronics plant. And what was astonishing to me as we toured this plant, and it was during the pandemic, when raw materials were very few, you know, they made do with what they had. But keep in mind, the blockade keeps a lot of resources from this island of over 11 million people. And being there, you know, we were welcomed with, it was like we went into a pep rally, right? Pep rally. Like people were shouting, they were singing, they were chanting, they welcomed us. And these were the trade labor unionists. We sat down, we heard from some of their leaders, we toured the plants. I was astonished to see that they were going green, you know, with solar panels for energy, you know, just being self-sustainable. And that's what I would say about Cuba. It is self-sustainable. But just imagine with the blockade lifted, how much more they can do, right? But being there, I asked a question to one of the trade labor unionists. And my question to him was, how do you guys organize? And of course, it was translated in Spanish. And he still didn't understand what I was saying. So I rephrased, you know, how do you guys get your organizing union campaign going? So when he understood during the translation what I was talking about, he sort of chuckled. And he says, well, we already have a union. We don't organize. You know, this company comes with a union. And I mean, I was like flabbergasted, right? Like, that is like my dream, to like go to a job and you already have a union. There is no organizing, you know, and they have collective bargaining contract agreements, you know, with the companies, with the corporations. If the corporation makes a surplus in revenue, they give it as bonuses equitably to the workers. Now just imagine that at your job, you're busting your butt, you're making the company profit, And they decide that, well, we made a little bit too much money, so let's split it with the workers. I mean, that's breathtaking, right? But at the same time, we're looking at that the revolutionary spirit of these workers, assault on one is an assault and an attack on all. And I took that spirit and that drive with me from Cuba to help organize and push the ball forward with collective bargaining in Virginia, which in 2020 became state law. We've been fighting for an ordinance. Workers are gaining that workers' power consciousness and understand what it is to stand together and fight for changes. These workers stood together in Virginia Beach about their wages. They went to these council meetings. They became very vocal. And the next thing you know, they passed a wage scale plan for all the workers. A wage scale plan that will guarantee them a raise each year. The city didn't give it to them. The workers stood in solidarity together and they got it. They fought for it. And so that fighting spirit of Cuba is what I take with me every day. And these workers have that fighting spirit because it's a community, right? Cuba taught us a lot, especially in the workforce. You have to have an extended family. It's a cultural community where workers look out for each other. Rarely did we see anyone go without. You know, if you didn't have anything, somebody was going to share, even if it was their last. And that's that spirit that we need to continue to just try to manifest within our own communities. You know, we went to the CDR and a lot of other places where we just saw the people coming together, and especially in this electronic plant. So I want to say, if you have not experienced that Cuban experience, please go. It will really change your life. And if you are a worker, which most of us are, understand that you have rights. Understand that you can let your voice be heard. Talk to your coworker. Start to organize. Build an organizing committee. And then start to fight for the changes that you need. Because you have to be the change that you're fighting for and that you're looking for. And I found a lot of this lion heart energy from Cuba. So I want to say thank you all for attending. I want to just continue to encourage you to go to Cuba, get this experience, and support our brothers and sisters any way that you can, because they need us and we need them. Cuba sí, bloqueo no.
I just want to do that one more time because I felt like that was a little weak. Cuba sí. Cuba sí. Cuba sí. Okay, we can go all night. I was also thinking, because I meant to do this at the beginning, how many people in this room have been on the IFCO-Caravan, the Friendshipment Caravan? That's almost all y'all. And some of these people came early and they're not raising their hand. We need to make sure everyone in this room comes again. But for real, if you've never been, please let me know so that I can find out a way to get you there. Now we're going to transition into our next piece. So for that, we have Isaac giving the introduction.
Hello, everybody. Last year, we were part of the 30th anniversary caravan, and a lot has changed since July. To give you all the updates, we have Marianne and Angie to speak about the effects of Hurricane Ian, the passing of the Family Code, and Cuban medical internationalism, and the state sponsor of terrorism list. So take it away, ladies.
Mike's on.
All right. Okay, we know about hurricanes in the U.S. and how poorly the response has been handled, even with national tragedies like Hurricane Katrina.
Which, by the way, Cuba tried to send doctors, right? But George Bush denied that.
Exactly. Even since 2005, things have not improved. We saw the response with Hurricane Ian. In the United States, a country with the majority of the world's resources, there still were 144 people who lost their lives. Not to talk about the complete neglect of Puerto Rico, not only during this hurricane, but since Hurricane Maria. In 2023, and we know it doesn't even have to be this way.
That's exactly right. And Cuba shows us that. During the preparation for Hurricane Ian, Cuba deployed buses all over the island to ensure that everyone made it out of the flood zones and that no one was left behind. It's important to note the kind of difference between a preparedness plan and what we saw happen in Florida, where most people who lost their lives were not evacuated in a timely manner. They were given the option to stay at home, and death should never be an option. Compare this with the Cuban response, and you'll see what happens when a government is actually run by and for the working class.
It's important to also mention that the blockade keeps Cuba from regular trade and makes it nearly impossible to purchase fuel to run the island. Cuba was suffering from immense fuel shortages and still found a way to make sure everyone was safe.
Did you know that this happened after the Matanzas fire on August 2nd, in which 40% of the local fuel in Cuba was depleted? We were in Matanzas during the caravan. We got to see beautiful things. We got to see artists, one who sang What a Beautiful World by Louis Armstrong. And then this tragedy happens a few weeks later. The Matanzas fire was caused by a lightning strike, and it brought the world together in sending aid to help Cuba. Russia sent $70 million worth of fuel alone.
Well, almost the world. In this moment, when the U.S. had an opportunity to alleviate the sanctions, instead, there was nothing more than a phone call from Biden and technical advice from professional teams. When people are in disaster, they need more than advice. They need action and resources to stop the disaster and to rebuild.
I mean, the advice is valuable, and the Cubans were grateful for the men and women firefighters, but they needed high-tech equipment. And if not for the help of the Venezuelans and Mexicans who have expertise in petroleum-related disasters, the efforts to stop the fire would have taken much longer, and more first responders' lives would have been lost. Let's talk about giving advice and knowing when to learn from others. When we look beyond the narrative of what the United States government gives us, when we look into a reality, we can see that the U.S. is plagued by houselessness, food insecurity, and medical instability and inaccessibility. And when we look at the actual numbers, Cuba is showing us a world where there's virtually no homelessness. Even in food shortages caused by the blockade, everyone gets to eat, and there's a higher life expectancy. If anything, it sounds like Biden should take a call from Diaz-Canal.
Cuba isn't just ensuring the lives of people on their own island either. They have the most doctors per capita in the world because education is actually accessible and sends those doctors to to all countries all over the globe. I mean, we are still in a pandemic, whether or not the U.S. acknowledges it. And Cuba is fighting by sending doctors and vaccines to people. Cuba vaccines to doctors, but was left behind. Not only did they send millions of vaccines to Central and South America, they sent to Asia and Eastern Europe. Cuba was sending vaccines to Syria when the best the U.S. can offer was bombs. And let's not forget that during the terrible pandemic that hit the whole world, Mexico did not have any access to vaccines to guarantee immunization for all the citizens. Cuba sent 9 million doses of Abdala vaccine. What's incredible was how we got to meet some of these scientists that created these vaccines, young people who were putting their talents and intellect to the use of humanity. We met them during this caravan and saw them firsthand that the humanity is reflected into their work.
That's actually my favorite part. But this is key. Cuba's building relationships of solidarity and showing us a world that can be in cooperation. But that was never on the agenda of U.S. imperialism. There's an antidote to U.S. imperialism, and it's called Cuban medical internationalism. During the caravan, we were able to visit the former naval base that was transformed into the medical school called the Latin American School of Medicine, also known as ALAM.
While the U.S. is over here saying we're number one and exporting violence to the detriment of the world, Cuba has been working tirelessly to make sure that everyone gets access to their needs. Did you know that the Latin American School of Medicine has trained over 30,000 doctors and has trained 220 of the U.S. alone since 2001? I know, right? There are doctors who would not have access to medical school in the US. I mean, offering this training to US citizens, despite the blockade, really shows the character of Cuba. That Cuba has historically had more to offer us than our own government. Don't even get me started on the lung cancer vaccine and the diabetes treatment that could save millions of lives of our own friends and family. But we can't access it because of the blockade. It not only hurts the people of Cuba, but literally kills us here in the United States.
That's a drop the mic moment. Also, I don't know how we didn't put this in our read through, but IFCO facilitates that scholarship. We facilitate the ELAM scholarship. So I'm sure that's being dropped in the chat right now, but reach out to us if you want to be a revolutionary doctor. We will help hook you up with the steps that you need to do to apply for the application. And I mean, I guess at the end of the day, the big question is, how does Cuba do it? I mean, if they don't have access to basic materials, to raw materials, to manufacture medicines, how are they able to make advancements like this?
I mean, in the 1980s, then leader Fidel Castro poured more than $1 billion into an ambitious new biotech industry. He sent students abroad for PhDs and built a scientific pole in Havana consisting of around 50 research institutions and enterprises. In Cuba, your life is not for sale. The priority is on prevention so people don't get sick in the first place. The needs of the people are at the center of every decision they make.
Priorities. And the big question is, who is they?
They is an actual government that is made up by and working for the working class. We can see this in the Family's Code. The Family's Code is basically part of their constitution. They just passed a new Family's Code in September that really took into account and reflects what a modern society looks like.
I think I heard about this, right? Queer couples can now marry and adopt children.
Right, but it's so much more than that. They address the rights of children and responsibilities of the parent, the rights of the elderly in choosing how to live their lives and final years, the fact that a family is often so much more than blood. They are recognizing that a family is based on love and care for one another. While we are here constantly combating the nuclear family and the isolation that is created by that model, Cuba is validating that family is and can be everyone.
I would also just like to say, I've never even heard the idea of children's rights. I mean, that is really a progressive model and really taking into account every form of person. So I hats off to Cuba. But also speaking about families, what about women's rights and the role of the mothers?
They thought about that too. Maternity leave is now 2 years in Cuba. And that's insane. And it can be extended to the person who's taking care of your child. So not only does it extend to the mother, but the person who, let's say if they want to go to work or if they want to go back to school, the mom, the grandmother can come in and that extends to the mother, to the grandmother. Wow, this is an alarming difference given the recent overturn of Roe versus Wade, which by the way, no one voted on and was done by a few people up top. And now we as a people are having a battle organizing against it.
I think that's such an important point. No one voted on that. And that's even if we had true voting access. In Cuba, the Family's Code took 3 years to draft. And that's because they held endless town halls over and over to see what people actually wanted. They kept redrafting until there was a document that reflected the desire of the people that they could bring forward. And that's what democracy looks like. I heard from the people who actually got to witness this election, and actually I was one of them, that in Cuba last November, not only were there voting stations all over the island, right? But if you, first of all, they hold the elections on Sundays, right? So most people are not at work, but if you are at work, you can stop and go vote and come back. That is voting access, right? You have the ability to actually get to a station and vote, right? And then when you get there, it's not even like a smear campaign. It's resumes on a wall telling you who this person actually is. It's not, and most of them know them. They're people from their neighborhood. This is not some million billionaire up on top, right? These are the people that you know, right? And these are the people that should represent you because they understand your community. With that being said, it's hard to even imagine a world like this. I mean, we're told over and over that places like this don't exist.
Which is why it is so important for people to come on the caravan, to see an alternative future for ourselves. That is why they try to keep us from coming. This island is 90 miles away from us, proving that we have an alternative, proving over and over that the grips of capitalism can be defeated through organizing a revolution. And once you see it for yourself, they can't take that away from you. I can say that for myself, because let me tell y'all, it changed my life. But they know that Cuba is the truth, and once you see it, these narratives and the media campaigns are over. The thing is, the rest of the world knows it too. Last November, for the 30th year in a row, the UN General Embassy Assembly voted overwhelmingly against the genocide blockade on Cuba, with only the US and Israel supporting this terrorism. But that's why the responsibility is on us, to hold our government accountable for the death and destruction it causes. We have to be the ones to fight. The caravan is more than an experience of an alternative future. It is then a responsibility for us to return and organize the people of the US to end this once and for all. Cuba has been fighting for us since the beginning. It's time for us to do our part.
That's exactly right. And that's exactly why Marian and Isaac are excited to continue to do this work as our caravan coordinators, delegation coordinators, right? They went on the caravans not just once or twice, but maybe 3 times. But they came back with wanting a different capacity to contribute, and knowing the importance of the struggle for Cuba, and resisting the oppression in the U.S.
That's right. This year's caravan will be to Santiago, which is the opposite side of Havana, which most people usually visit when they travel to Cuba. The revolution actually started on this side of the island, where my first caravan was, so I'm a little bit biased in saying it's the best part of the island. I think everybody should go to this side. It's a lot of agriculture. It's where the true community is at. In the capital, you get kind of like a nuclear experience versus you going to the countryside and seeing how people really actually get their hands dirty and how they do the work. It all comes full circle at the end of the day. So Isaac is one of those coordinators as well. What would you like to say, Isaac? What inspires you most about Cuba?
Well, definitely one of my favorite moments during the closing of last year for the history of Cuba as a friendly country was offering assistance as an intermediary in the talks to establish peace between the Colombian government and the National Liberation Army. Yes, even though Cuba continues to be on a sponsor of terrorism list, it is a country that has preferred never send more weapons or people to die in absurd wars, but to build peace. Colombia has been experiencing an armed conflict for more than 50 years. Despite the series of peace treaties, the most recent of which was signed in 2016 between the guerrillas of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia and the authorities of the South American nation. Cuba's participation has been very important in resolving this conflict, and although there have been various pauses in the talks and more than one president has had to resume talks and deals with other issues, we hope that peace in Colombia can be done soon. And again, this is why it's so important for you to see the work that Cuba does for yourself. And here's actually a video to give you a glimpse of the caravan is all about.
Because so many people I know have said that it's a place that you can read about, but you gotta come here to understand. And so the first opportunity that I got, shout out to Pastors for Peace, I was like, I'm coming. I wanna see this revolutionary socialist project 90 miles off the shore of the United States.
Because I wanted to see what it could be like when the working class is in charge of the state, what socialism has to offer our poor people across the world, and also just to make connections with comrades here.
To celebrate the victory of the vaccines that Cuba developed here in Cuba over the pandemic, and the example that Cuba sets for us in the United States and the rest of the world in solidarity, and its belief that humanity is our homeland.
To really come to like a socialist country and like see it with my own eyes has been such an amazing experience.
We came on the caravan because as to form revolution, we have to be in all the places where all the people are.
I came to Cuba because I believe in socialism, and Cuba is a North Star for the working class struggles that they're fighting for in a world that is free from the grips of capitalism that just causes death and destruction. And I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to see it in action, and I wanted to learn from all the healthcare, the education, the social infrastructure, the media, the people, the art, the culture, the politics, and the revolution that is here.
Learn from the doctors, learn from the health professionals, learn from the government officials on how all of these things communicate and work together so that I can bring it back home to the communities who need it, which are the Black and brown communities of our country.
I wanted to get firsthand experience on what these people really are, how they really are, what they really feel, what's really truly important to them, and what their value systems are.
Are you excited to be in Cuba? I'm really excited. We're here. We're in Cuba. Let's go.
Place also, you saw at the end that those cute people at the end, those were Tahia, Islam, and David, who is here doing the text. So I want to give a shout out to David for making sure everything is running beautifully as always. And for now, we're going to hand it over to Cheryl Labash. She's a longtime Cuba activist, journalist, and current co-chair of the National Network on Cuba, and my very dear friend. Take it away, Cheryl.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be on this wonderful Friendshipment Caravan kickoff. The Friendshipment started back when Cuba was facing a tremendous challenge after the Soviet Union was dismantled by imperialism, and Cuba's major trading partners that helped it develop despite the blockade were erased. So US imperialism thought, aha, we really have Cuba in the crosshairs now, and we can defeat this revolution. The world, including here in the United States, people came together and said, hell no, we're going to have Cuba's back. Cuba is in solidarity with the world, and we are going to organize. So at that time, IFCO decided that, of course, they were already doing caravans to Latin America. They decided that what was needed was a caravan to Cuba. But how do you do that with an island, right? So the caravan started gathering material aid, symbolic, only symbolic, and people to go to the border and cross into Mexico or Canada on their way to Cuba. And the first years of that were tremendous struggles. And finally, even though the blockade wasn't ended, the US resistance ended pretty much. So new methods have to be established in order to carry all of this out. And that's the process that we're involved in now. I've supported IFCO-Pastors for Peace since the early 1990s. I think the first time I was down to Laredo was 1992 or 1993. Participating in that collective action, working together to combine all of the aid trying to find ways to actually confront the blockade. Today, we confront the blockade. I'm not speaking for IFCO, but we as people in the United States, we confront the blockade by actually going to Cuba. The US government is now putting up all of these bureaucratic scare tactics, which make some people afraid to go. So it's our responsibility to go to Cuba, come back and tell the story, and also participate in the struggle to end the blockade, to get Cuba off the list of state sponsors of terrorism. And all of these horrendous, targeted, really, you know, when you think about the US government stopping remittances, stopping Cubans who live in the United States from sending money to their families, basically stopping the air travel except to Havana, all of these things and other, you know, if you write Cuba on a check, or if you write it in a Venmo or a PayPal, that's going to be blocked. You have to prove that you are innocent until you are guilty until you prove yourself innocent of violating the blockade. This is done in many. There's a Canadian coffee shop that sold Cuban coffee, right? They were blocked. They're in Canada. There's no formal blockade in Canada, but they were blocked by the US banks. So understanding how wide the blockade is and why it's so important that right here inside the country that actually commits this crime, a crime against humanity, a unilateral crime against the Cuban people that's gone on for 60 years. So long it becomes part of the background. You know, oh, well, that just is the way it is. But no, we have to change it. We have the power to change it. Many people, members of the National Network on Cuba, and I'm proud to say that IFCO-Pastors for Peace, of course, is, and that, in fact, Gail Walker is one of the co-chairs, as is Shaquille Fontenot, who we're going to hear tonight too. The National Network on Cuba is working on a campaign to mobilize to get Cuba off that list of state sponsors of terrorism. The only thing that's needed for that to happen, the only thing, not Congress, is for Joe Biden to write a letter and say, I want Cuba off that list. That's all that's needed. It's notifying Congress. So we need to get him to write that letter. And the only way we can do it is like what Chris Hollis was saying, by organizing and demanding. So join with us in this campaign, build the Friendshipment Caravan. I have to put in a plug here for the May Day Brigade. So if you're not going in July, do come for May Day and join us in this fight. You don't have to be the member of this organization or that organization. We're united through Cuba and our desire to make sure that the Cuban example not only lives on, but that more people in the United States know that there can be a change, that people can live a different way, that we don't have to put up with all this nonsense of what's happening in our lives. We can have a decent life where our healthcare, education, culture, and sports are all guaranteed for everyone, not just for an elite. So viva Cuba, hasta la victoria siempre.
Thank you, Cheryl. And next, we'll hear from Shaquille Fontenot, who heads the Low Country Action Committee in South Carolina, is a 2021 Caravanista, and as you heard from Cheryl, a newly elected co-chair of the National Network on Cuba.
Hey everyone, it's so great to be here with all of my comrades. I'm with you in spirit, physically, here with you all virtually. But Angie and the IFCO team asked me to come speak about, why we organize for Cuba, why we do the work that we do, why do we care? And there are so many reasons that I can share, but I'm going to keep it as concise as possible because I feel like my reasons are less important than your reasons. I think that you should go and see the island for yourself and gain your own perspective because that is something that the US does not want you to do. And in my experience, most of the time, when there's something the US does not want you to do, it's probably something that you should be doing to advocate against their imperialist and capitalist activities. So my first trip to Cuba was in 2021 with the Friendshipment Brigade, but the Friendshipment Caravan, but I actually had been organizing with a lot of Cuba solidarity activists prior to even arriving on the island. So I would say definitely it's important to see the Socialist Project in action, but you also have to educate yourself beforehand and get a greater perspective of the United States and Cuba relations. You'll be able to see it firsthand when you go to the island, but you should inform yourself and talk to your comrades, gain some resources, gain some insight. And so you're enabled to continue the fight as soon as you get back. But really, Cuba as a place, as a people, are so important to me. One of my comrades, Devin Springer, refers to Cuba as an open air prison. And the jailer is the United States of America. So people are having to bring their own gloves to surgeries on the island. They're leaving the island in droves due to a lack of economic opportunity. And many of the youth there are being propagandized to believe that their government is the problem. So couple this with the tireless impact of the blockade on water access, travel, basic necessities, internet access, food, agriculture, and so many aspects of development. This is to intentionally drive misery and depression, and that hopelessness, as well as the massive loss of young workers, means that there's a dip in the labor force in Cuba as well. So this is where development and innovation arise. So the only thing that remains is the global contradiction of US imperialism. So sanctions, the US state sponsors of terrorists, are forms of neo-colonial weaponry that paired with, in the United States, increased and consistent police violence, resource control, connection control. These are all attempts to strangle a people that are revolutionary. So like I mentioned, I was educated on a lot of the US's initiatives to really put Cuba in a stronghold before I arrived at the island, but seeing it for myself really shifted my perspective in a way that I wish everyone could see. I think that just knowing the resiliency of the Cuban people, despite all of these things, made it easier for me to come back to the United States and fight, not on their behalf, but in solidarity with them. A lot of people mentioned earlier the work they've done in the labor movement, in terms of healthcare, in terms of internationalism and outreach. And again, this is all despite all the things that I mentioned earlier. Even from a standpoint of restricting communication access, the United States has a hand in really shifting narratives globally. And so that's part of our responsibility in coming back and fighting against the massive propaganda, but also showing concrete examples of what is possible as we unite for a better future. So Cheryl mentioned earlier some of the campaigns that we're working on at the NNOC. And like I mentioned, before you even set foot on the island, you can make a difference. You can really come there and you're going to be welcomed with open arms regardless. But I think that knowing that you have the tools available to you now is super important. And I feel like we have a responsibility to take more care of one another because the United States does not want to see this happen. Though powers that be will continue to push us towards the edge. And I know that we are more than capable of uniting as a people and uplifting solutions. And I believe that Cuba is one of those solutions. So again, go see the project and process for yourself. Talk to your neighbors that won't speak to you, inform them about what you're seeing, and get back and do the work. So I'm hoping that everyone that's in that room and on this call will go on the upcoming Friendshipment Caravan and or other brigades like the Mayday Brigade, but just go and see the island and do what you have to do. I am not a co-chair in name only. I'm a co-chair because I believe in this fight, and I know that no matter how long it takes, the people are going to win. So thank you all.
One more round of applause for all of our panelists. I do want to speak to Shaquille and Cheryl's and everyone's point, basically, that there are the tools now that we have before you even set foot on the island to start your fight against the blockade, right? So that looks like education, right? We all come from different foundations, different starting points. There's tons of classes here available at the People's Forum. There's classes all over the internet. If you don't know where to find your information, come find me. We will get you we will get you started and get you started in your journey to fight against the blockade, because it is our responsibility. We can also start with these zines, which we made that are up on the table. They are free 99. I also have the PDF available so that you can download them, give them to your friends, because once you know, it is then your responsibility to tell everyone around you. I can tell you, everyone I know has heard me say the same thing over and over, and anytime I get to a new space, I start from the beginning about Cuba, because every space is a place to advocate, right? Every space is political, therefore every space is your responsibility to let people know about what their own government is doing, right? We're here to talk about why, and I have a lot of whys, but there's one that I want to focus on, which was last November, and it was mentioned, the UN General Assembly vote. I was given the opportunity to witness it for myself. And, you know, I do a lot of amazing work. IFCO, this entire experience has really been life-changing and educational and growing. And, you know, at certain points I wonder, am I romanticizing this, right? But when you go to the UN General Assembly vote and you hear 184, 86 voices stand up and say what this small island of 11 million people are doing for them, if anything, I'm under romanticizing it, right? If anything, I'm not saying enough about Cuba. Because when you hear, you know, it's not just, you know, big countries, it's not just the West, it is the smallest countries, ones that I have to sit there and look up because I've never heard of them before, right? And they're saying, Cuba sent us doctors. Cuba sent us vaccines. And it really struck home when the ambassador for Fiji stood up, which is where my family's from, and spoke about Cuba's internationalism and what they've been doing for my family. I really understood that Cuba not only has the back of the world, my family specifically, but all of us. They have our back. So it's time that we organize and take it seriously, take our responsibility seriously to organize to end this blockade, because when you hear the rest of the world plead on the floor and say, it's been 30 years of us telling you that we're done, that we don't want this blockade, and you haven't moved, I mean, that it falls back at us. Right? It's our responsibility to organize against our government's sanctions. With that, I would like to extend the opportunity for you to give towards our next caravan, towards our next, Marianne, towards our next moment, we're going to do a little pass the plate. You can see on the screen the how to give via the interwebs. If you don't give today, maybe you have $1 tomorrow. There's always a moment to give, and this is just the beginning, right? So the caravan is not until July. We will be collecting medicine as we do every year from now until then, and then we'll be bringing that down with us when we head towards Santiago in July. All right. And I think that's it. I'm proud of all of y'all for sticking through this long program. Please drop all your questions in the chat. I'm sure there are people online to answer that. I can't wait to talk to the people I haven't spoken to yet. And if you are not on our email list, make sure you talk to Emily before you leave. That's it. Thank you. Cuba sí. Cuba sí. Cuba sí. A little bit louder. Cuba sí. Cuba sí. Cuba sí. All right. Viva Cuba!